Hello, my little freaks. You are in for a treat today. I have been slaving away in the kitchen, and the sauce is finally ready. Now, we as a community have been hunting down Ross Coulthart's giant UFO that was allegedly so big that it couldn't be moved, so they decided to hide it by building over the top of it. And this is the third episode in that little mini series. Now, in part one, we looked at all of the little clips of Ross Coulthart where he dropped some nuggets, where we kind of narrowed it down to possibly being in Australia. And then in part two, we looked at a very weird email that I received after part one, and we took a deep dive into the Australian Parliament House, which was a location that a lot of you guys suggested in the community as well. We looked at the strange history of Canberra and how the ACT was formed and the many rumors of what actually lies below it. But today, we are going on a deep dive of Pine Gap and the strange history and mystery that surrounds it. We're going to be talking about remote viewers that were claiming there was an alien base there as early as the 70s, the CIA's coup that got the Australian Prime Minister sacked after he threatened to shut it down. The surrounding area has also been known as a UFO hotspot since the 40s, and Stephen Greer has even weighed in on Pine Gap in his new disclosure briefing document. And we've got testimony from you guys and the things that you have seen in this area too. And we're going to be getting into all of that and more today. So if you haven't watched part one and two, make sure you do go and check it out. But in reality, you don't need to have seen them to watch this video. Okay. Pine Gap was easily the most popular suggestion by you guys in the comments. And I think this video just stands on its own. And I have to agree that after researching the strangeness that surrounds this place, a giant crashed UFO in the area would not shock me at all. The middle of Australia is a very strange place. Now, before we get started, if you're new here, welcome. My name is Josh. Make yourself comfortable. Maybe pause this right now. Go make a hot cup of coffee. Maybe fill up your drink bottle. Have a little stretch, because you are going to want to be locked in for this one. Okay. I'll make sure it's going to be long. I'll make sure I leave video chapters if you want to skip ahead. So let's get straight into it, guys. What is Pine Gap? Well, Pine Gap is Australia's best and worst kept secret. Everybody knows about it, but nobody actually knows what goes on there. All we know is that it's a highly secretive intelligence gathering installation in the Northern Territory, and that it's a joint facility operated by Australia and America. But based on what we know, it seems like it's occupied far heavier by the Americans. One of the biggest agencies involved in Pine Gap is the NSA, the National Security Agency, the most far-reaching spy agency on the planet, who has rejected over 90% of UAP-related Freedom of Information Act requests since 1990. That's nearly 30 years of denial that UFOs exist. The CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works' best customer, according to Don Phillips, who worked there and claimed some of the technology that went into his main project, which was the SR-71 Blackbird, which we can see there. This was a project that was commissioned by the CIA, and Don Phillips says that the technology that went into that project came from craft out of this world. And if you want to see more about that, go back and watch this video that I did recently. And then we've got the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office. This is who David Grush worked for when he interviewed the 40 witnesses and came to the conclusion that there has been a multi-decade crash retrieval and reverse engineering program that was operating beyond congressional oversight and likely being ran by these three intelligence agencies. So these three, the biggest three intelligence agencies involved in covering up the truth about UFOs, the reality of non-human intelligence, reside in a secret facility in an Australian territory where the federal government has the right to intervene and overrule at any time. So just like last video, when we looked at Parliament House, Pine Gap also exists in a territory where the federal government has control. So territories are not recognized in the same way that a state is. They're not protected constitutionally the same way that a state is. So the ACT and the Northern Territory, which are marked in red, are the only places in Australia where this is the case. And they didn't even exist when Australia was federated in 1901. They were created. and they're both home to some of the strangest and secretive facilities in the country. Now, I'm not distinctly saying that these territories were carved out and kept under federal rule to house giant UFOs that couldn't be moved. But if we're talking about the greatest cover-up of all time, something that has caused people potentially from or involved with these intelligence agencies to take the lives of their own countrymen, possibly even their own president, in the name of maintaining its secrecy, an Australian territory that is under federal oversight is the perfect place to set up these kind of operations. And you might be saying, what do you mean? Couldn't the government just overrule the CIA in this case if they have the final say? No, my sweet summer child. Australia bends right over and does what Big Daddy America tells them to. People often have a go at me for talking about American politics as if it doesn't concern me. Now, I appreciate why you would come to that conclusion, because realistically, that should be the case. But it isn't. America is the leader of the Western world, and it is supported by the Five Eyes Alliance. And I think Malfoy and his gang here are the perfect representation of this alliance. Malfoy is the cunning leader who calls the shots and he always gets what he wants. And then you've got Crabbe and Goyle, or UK and the Australia, the kind of dumb thugs that kind of follow along, seemingly mostly out of fear of what might happen if they would actually stand up for themselves, but also likely out of probably incompetency just to stand on their own feet. But interestingly, Australia actually did speak up once, and it didn't go well, and we'll come back to that in a moment. And then we've got Canada and New Zealand, who are just like the randoms at the back, probably thinking, how the fuck did we get dragged into this? Malfoy makes a lot of bold claims of his brilliance and longevity, but his actions are actually quite deceitful and destructive. And what a coincidence that every single one of these countries right now is in heavy decline. And the one thing they all have in common is they're part of this Five Eyes Alliance. In Australia, food is so expensive at the supermarket, it's insane. Most young people have just given up on buying a home. And I know it's slightly different in each country, but we're all having our own version of an economic crisis right now. And what's wild is China, who we are told is the evil conspiring enemy, not only have these beautiful cities, a booming economy where it's cheap to live and food's cheap, high-tech everything, but are building empty cities for fun. I don't want to get too off track here, but I want to talk about this quickly. If you Google China's ghost cities, you will see that there are like 50 of these full-on cities that are empty. Meanwhile, no one here can get a house. And of these empty cities, this was one of them. They are taking the piss that hard that they are replicating other cities for fun. If you thought this was Paris, no, this is Tianducheng, a city that is quite literally the Eiffel Tower from Temu. This was built in 2007, and by 2013, it only had 2,000 people living in it. I'm not trying to say China do no wrong. All governments are involved in shady shit, okay? No one's innocent here. But it's extremely hard to wrap my head around this. Meanwhile, I'm paying $10 for a pineapple, unable to buy a house, and being told that China is the evil enemy, the dark place. Right, got it. Something about that just doesn't feel right to me. But look, I don't want to get too off track here, so let's get back to Pine Gap, because at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. It is hard to give too much detail about Pine Gap because it's just so locked down, right? But I think it's quite obvious that the majority of the facility is underground. I think we can all agree on that here at the beginning of the video. But its location is very interesting. It's in the heart of an area that is riddled with mystery, UFO sightings, orbs, alleged alien bases, and a very deep cultural significance. And those are the things we're going to be focusing on a bit more today. So before we do that, though, I want to give a little bit of a context as to what's going on and a brief history of Pine Gap and how the Aussies tried to kick the Americans out of their own country and failed. So this is the agreement between the United States and Australia to build Pine Gap, the Pine Gap Agreement, which was established on December 9th, 1966. This was during the peak of a UFO wave around the world. And funnily enough, only 8 months prior to this, Australia had its most ever famous case of a mass UFO sighting in Westall, Melbourne. Now, I'll be clear, there's nothing out here that suggests that Pine Gap being built was because of this mass sighting in Australia. I'm just connecting some dots here. At the end of the day, it's probably just a coincidence. So Westall, Melbourne, 1966. Hundreds of school children and teachers saw a craft, some saw multiple craft, land on a field that's adjacent to their high school. They ran over to observe it before it eventually lifted off the ground, turned on its belly, and shot away. The exact same way that Bob Lazar described it happening 15 years later in the 80s. Now, I've cut up a clip from an Australian news station for you guys to check out. So let's take a look at that.
We noticed these 3 craft hovering above the school, which was a bit unusual. They definitely weren't aircraft. And then after about 10 minutes, we saw one go down into an area behind our school called the Grange. So being a little bit of a rebel, as I was at school, I was one of the first to run through and jump over the fence and arrive at the Grange, and it was on the ground in front of me. The other 2 girls had arrived before me, and one was hysterical, Tanya, and the other girl had fainted. So I just looked at it, and after a few minutes, it just raised up above me, probably to about 12 feet, turned on its side and went zoom straight up into the air and disappeared almost instantly. And there were 2 other craft in the air at the time.
I was actually in science class, and we had a student had rung in and flung the door open and said, Mr. Greenwood, there's things in the sky, there's flying saucers in the sky. So we all ran down the corridor and out onto the oval, and yes, there were flying saucers in the sky. I saw 3 of them, but it took me quite a while to sort of comprehend what I was looking at, because I'd never seen anything like that before.
The craft I saw was silver in colour. It was round. It did come down on the ground. Even though I didn't see it on the ground, I saw the marks that it left later on that day. It could move incredibly fast, and it could also appear to stand still. When it took off from the other aircraft that were buzzing it, it made them look as though they were at standstill.
I ask what happened to the girl. You took her back to the school, the one that was hysterical. Is it Tanya? And she went into the hospital, and then you went to visit her at her place, and they said she didn't live there.
That's
yes,
right.
I went to her house the following day, and an English-speaking woman opened the door and said there had never been a Tanya living there. Now, the problem with that is that Tanya's parents didn't speak English to start with. I think they were Yugoslavian. So I'd been to this house a lot of times and then was told, no, sorry, you're mistaken.
Oh, my God, that's
So what's happened to her? Do you know if she disappeared? Have you had any contact with her? Do you know where she is and what happened?
I have had no personal contact with her. I know one of the researchers has. She prefers to stay anonymous and not be involved in anything at all. She told the researcher that she had no recall of what had happened. And then there was a very odd story about her parents putting her in a convent for some reason that was, to me, totally ridiculous.
What has happened to your story since then, and do you think there has been a cover-up?
Oh, absolutely. That film, I was interviewed by Channel 9 and out the front of the school, and a man walked up to me. He was in blue, so he may have been Air Force or perhaps police, I'm not sure. Put his hand on my shoulder and told me to stop talking and go back into the school, and then turned around to the the cameraman and the reporter and told them both to go away. But previous to that happening, not long after the sighting, the army arrived opposite the school in 3 jeeps and jumped out of the back, and they were in camouflage gear and all that sort of stuff. So they were sort of out the school for quite a while. And then we had a special assembly. We were all called to a special assembly and told that we hadn't seen anything. It was a weather balloon. We're all massively hysterical. Don't talk about it. If you talk about it, you'll get into trouble. And I got detention because I had been interviewed by Channel 9.
Wow, what a strange mystery happening down in Australia. Do I sound like that? I swear whenever we hear Aussies on TV, we sound so retarded. It makes me cringe. I don't know why. I swear we don't actually sound like that in real life. Anyway, so their school was swooped with military presence. Someone disappeared and was never seen again. And there was a major pressure for these people to remain silent about what they saw. And obviously that's a very perfectly rational response to a weather balloon, right? I mean, yeah, you pressure people not to speak. People get abducted and never seen again. That's what happens when you see weather balloons. And that's exactly how the newspaper tried to play it off. I feel like maybe Australia might have learned a couple of things from old Uncle Sam there. Now, I made a comparison earlier to the Five Eyes Alliance being of a group of school kids, being similar to a group of school kids who just follow around the school bully because they think he's cool and they actually are scared of him and what he might do if they spoke up. Much like Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle. Well, in 1972, just 2 years after Pine Gap started operating, we elected a man named Gough Whitlam to be our Prime Minister. And he did speak up. Not long after becoming Prime Minister, he withdrew the last Australian troops from Vietnam and became quite vocal about Australia standing on its own 2 feet and removing any foreign overlords who could start pulling strings from the shadows. Now, Gough wanted greater transparency about US bases like Pine Gap, and this obviously concerned the Americans, so like any normal person would, they began spying on the Prime Minister and his officials. So, in 1974, Sir John Kerr was appointed as the Governor General. And when you trace the money, this was essentially backed and funded by the CIA. By 1975, nothing had changed, and Gough began threatening to reveal the CIA's agents' names if they wouldn't comply. And later that year, Gough Whitlam was sacked as the Prime Minister of Australia by the Governor General. Yes, the Governor General holds the power to sack an Australian Prime Minister under some extremely vague and hazy section of the Australian Constitution. And that is what happened. The CIA hit us with the old Uno reverse card, the Guatemala coup 1-2. And we have been America's soy boy ever since. But honestly, fair enough. Like, how dare we think that we could make rules in our own country? Like, I'm actually a bit embarrassed to assume that we could have autonomy with our own borders. Like, absolute idiots. Learn your place. Okay, I think we've looked at this disturbing slide enough today. So let's talk about what's going on around Pine Gap and why this area is already a hotbed for strangeness. About 100 kilometers or 60 miles, sorry, that was wrong. About 40 kilometers or 25 miles west of Pine Gap is a place called Mount Zeil, a place that one of the most well-known and foundational remote viewers, Pat Price, claimed was one of 4 alien bases around the world, and that he had viewed it using these remote viewing techniques that he learned at SRI and through the military in Project Stargate. Reports say that he saw a huge hollowed out subterranean facility beneath the peak of Mount Zeil. He claimed that this site housed a significant population of extraterrestrial beings, far more than the other 3 sites that he'd viewed, and he said this surprised him. He expected there to be less. He described them as humanoid shape, possibly greys, using advanced equipment unlike human tech that was smooth, metallic, and purpose-built. He labeled it a hub for processing activities and speculated that it tied to a human-alien hybridization program. He labeled it, sorry, we did that part. During the session, he claimed that the alien sensed his psychic presence, forcing him to abort the session. And it's important to note that these things were like a far cry from the normal remote viewing targets and results that Pat Price would get. And from what we're told, like these are not the type of things that they were remote viewing in this time. Like this whole program, Project Stargate, was really targeted and set up during the Cold War to spy on the Russians. And so it was all a lot of like military stuff, right? So Pat Price made these claims in the very early 70s, in like the early days of Project Stargate, right around the time that Pine Gap had become operational. Now, there's no mention of Pine Gap in any of this, but it's all happening around the same time, which is weird. But the thing is, he did this in his own time. He was never tasked to do this. He was never tasked to look at these locations. He just did this off his own bat by himself. But he still reported his findings to the men who were in charge of the program at the time, which was Dr. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ. Now, Hal Puthoff didn't know what to make of these claims because they were untasked, they were unmonitored sessions. This was just Pat Price's reputation and what he's being told coming to him. So Hal Puthoff just kind of took it and kept record of it. Because the thing is, Pat Price was well known for his accuracy and detailed visuals on his remote viewing targets. In 1973, he described a secret NSA facility so accurately with such detail that the CIA decided to fund the program further based on those results, which led it to become being the Project Stargate that we hear about today. Now, interestingly, you probably could guess this, 2 years after Pat Price made these claims, he was found dead in his home due to a heart attack at the ripe old age of 57. Did someone heart attack him for saying things or looking at things he wasn't supposed to? Maybe. I think we've seen people taken out for less. But also, not everything is a conspiracy. So maybe we should just relax about that one because we'll never know. But later, in the 1980s, Pat Price's reports got passed on to Skip Atwater. Skip was dubbed as like the backbone of Project Stargate, the longest standing member of the program, and he had the authority to assign challenge targets to his team of remote viewers for training or validation. So he decided to try and verify the claims made by Pat Price by tasking them to multiple psychics on his team, one of which consisted of the very famous Joe McMoneagle, also known as Remote Viewer Number 1. And another psychic, by the way, who was renowned for his accuracy and specifically for spying on Soviet submarines that were being built in giant hangars in 1979. And this is what he reported seeing. And I want to note as well that these were blind experiments, okay? These viewers weren't tasked to view this with any preconceived idea of what they're meant to be looking at, okay? And this is what he saw in 1982 when he was given just the coordinates. That's generally what they tend to give these people, from what I understand. An underground command center resembling NORAD, with advanced technology with like control panels and screens. Short greys, small humanoid aliens with large eyes working alongside humans in a structured setup. Tunnels and operational infrastructure suggesting a functional base, possibly military or scientific. Another bunch of remote viewers also viewed the location and had similar results, but we only have the names of 3 of them, but there were more. So I'm just going to stick to the 3 that we have names of, and we'll kind of brush over what they reported. So first one was Mel Riley, who was a U.S. Army sergeant. He reported seeing a hollowed out mountain, artificial structures inside with like tunnels and chambers, and advanced machinery and activity. Next was Bill Ray, an intelligence officer. He saw underground passages, a technological presence, and possibly humanoid figures. And Paul H. Smith, an Army captain, saw subterranean facilities, unusual architecture like curved tunnels and metallic surfaces, a sense of otherness in the environment, possibly tech-related. And again, all of these tests were conducted with a very sort of rigorous scientific approach. These remote viewers did not know about Pat Price's claims nearly a decade earlier. But all of them corroborated the claims made by Pat Price. They saw a subterranean facility inhabited by a what looked like a non-human intelligence inside of Mount Zeil, 40 kilometers away from Pine Gap. So let's skip forward to the modern day now. Who remembers this clip from about 6 months ago?
Bases here on our planet, many of which are located high in the desolate areas in the mountains, where very few people ever go, and beneath the sea. There's a major base in the Pacific that we're virtually certain exists off Baja, between Baja and Guadalupe Island, potentially beneath the ocean floor. This has been monitored. We have hundreds of videos of the vehicles coming and going from that location and plunging into the sea and going down into and coming from this base. This is extraordinarily important for everyone to understand. Very importantly, there is some percentage inside our national security state apparatus that knows this to be true.
So that was around the time that the USO topic was really beginning to heat up. And he says that there are bases high in the mountains, in desolate, hard to reach areas. And it makes sense, right? Deep under the ocean, high up in the mountains, the Earth is a huge place. And I really think that there is more than enough room on this Earth for another species or a breakaway civilization with advanced technology to live and operate without anybody knowing. This is actually something I've wanted to talk about in depth a bit more, but I think maybe another video for that. Now, I'm sure you've seen Stephen Greer doing the podcast circuit lately, waving his big, thick book around. Now, you thought I was going to say something else. He claims this book has been used to brief the president and his staff of the UFO and alien issue. And of course, you can buy your own redacted copy of this book for some extortionate price. But I'm sorry, Stephen, when I'm coughing up $10 for a pineapple, I might have to pass on that. But luckily, however, I have been sent a copy of it. Shout out to Reese, the UF Aussie on YouTube, for hooking me up with that. And within this 325-page document, Stephen Greer actually weighs in on Pine Gap. This is what he had to say. Pine Gap in Australia is understood to be a prime location for these covert UFO UAP operations. This underground facility is similar to the one located in the Chihuahua Desert. A physicist with whom Dr. Greer had met in Seattle years ago shared his experience. He was accompanied by security personnel for protection. He had been on helicopters that entered the Pine Gap facility, which, like the one in the Chihuahua Desert, is concealed by a hologram designed to resemble a mountainside. Upon landing on an elevator platform, the descent leads deep underground. During this time, the physicist observed the creation of these entities, describing them as emerging from a conveyor belt, much like sausages. I feel like you could have said something better than sausages. That just makes it sound funny. These fake aliens are produced with advanced UFO UAP craft, electronic warfare systems capable of affecting consciousness, and tools to render people unconscious or stunned. They also employ canisters of drugs to incapacitate those in the area. So first of all, the interesting part there is that a helicopter entered the facility, which is concealed by a hologram designed to resemble a mountainside. Well, Pine Gap, at least the part of it that we know to be Pine Gap, is very flat. So this means either some smaller surrounding mountains of Pine Gap are actually part of the base, or maybe, given that they also reference extraterrestrials, greys, that they're actually talking about Mount Zeil. I don't know, just looking at all the data we've got here. The whole hologram thing as well, I don't know. I can't really comment on that. Who knows what kind of technology the CIA are using, but it would not surprise me. Now, Greer has talked about these fake aliens for a long time. He calls them PLFs, programmed life forms, and that these short greys are actually a form of biological robot that has like a programmed AI in it to perform certain tasks. So he literally thinks short greys, short aliens, they're robots. They're AI. They don't have a consciousness to them. And it sounds silly, right? It really does. But in reality, we kind of have like a tangible evidence that suggests that this is actually kind of a realistic idea or solution. And that is because we are already doing it ourselves. We are creating intelligent humanoid robots that we are trying to instill an artificial intelligence so they can take care of monotonous and laborious tasks for us. So I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that another intelligence is doing the exact same thing, but with a much further advanced technology, making them appear much more realistic and much more intelligent. Now, I'm not saying this is true, by the way, speculating here. I'm just saying that as crazy as that, the Greer programmed life form thing sounds, it's actually not that crazy when you think about it. So what else is going on around Pine Gap? Quite a bit, actually. And this is what I love about researching this stuff with you guys, because I'm learning things too, right? I didn't know 70% of the stuff in this video last week. 340 kilometers north of Pine Gap is a place called Wycliffe Well. This was originally just a roadhouse and a fuel stop on the Sturt Highway, which is a giant road that connects the Northern Territory to South Australia. But the area has accounts of strange lights in the sky dating as far back as World War II in the 40s, and it never stopped. Wycliffe Well became so well known as a UFO hotspot to locals. People in the area, you know, the people who would sort of be going up and down, because this is a remote, very remote area. But the people who would travel this sort of area, Northern Territory, they knew that this was a UFO hotspot, and it became so well known that in 1985, Australian Navy sailor Lou Farkas decided to capitalize on this reputation. Bit of an ideas man, bit of an opportunist, old Lou. And he decided to turn the whole place into an alien-themed tourist attraction and labeled it the UFO capital of Australia. He invested around $4 million into the area over the next 25 years. I know it doesn't look like $4 million went into this place in these photos here, but he built a 300-seat Galaxy-style auditorium restaurant, a caravan park, and a whole bunch of like other alien-themed features and murals. And in an interview, he was asked a few interesting questions about Wycliffe, and I just thought I'd share a couple of them with you guys. He was asked if his business venture at Wycliffe was successful. And he said, sometimes the UFO thing was good for business, and sometimes it was bad. On a lot of occasions, people were getting chased down the highway by lights. They would pull up and be panicking so much that they would say, quick, give me a room. We can't stay out there. So that was good for business. It chased people away at times, but it brought customers in too. He was then asked what kind of tourists came to Wycliffe. We used to get a lot of people who had personal UFO experiences that they had never told anybody. When they came in, they had this urge to release their burdens. I had so many stories that I started these diaries. They were on the counter and people would just write their experience in there. There were hundreds and hundreds of stories. Do you still have the diaries? When I left everything. I didn't bring anything away from there. I left everything for the next owner so he could carry on. I don't have anything other than my memories. It would be so cool to read those diaries of all the travelers of the decades just writing in and reporting their crazy experiences. But unfortunately, today, Wycliffe has been completely abandoned. And likely, I would say the diaries have too. It's a literal ghost town, according to Google Maps reviews, with abandoned buildings everywhere, broken glass everywhere. Even I don't think you can't even get fuel there anymore. I don't think. Like, it's completely just done, I think. I guess the person who bought it from Lou just didn't quite have the same level of enthusiasm as Lou did. Now, it would be remiss of me to make a video talking about Pine Gap and how it ties to the paranormal facet of the Outback Australia without looking at how the original custodians of the land interpret these things. So let's start with the big one, quite literally, Uluru. I'm not sure if people grasp how massive this thing is. It's taller than the Eiffel Tower, which means you're probably going to see a Temu version of this pop up somewhere in a remote area of China. No, I'm kidding. But who knows? You might. It is huge. It's more than double the height you can see there of the Great Pyramid of Giza, by the way. And it obviously covers a much bigger surface area, like crazy bigger. It's like the width of a small city, and taller than the Eiffel Tower. Like, it's kind of insane. Like, if you haven't seen it, I haven't seen it, but I've thought about it enough to grasp this, that like, if you just grasp those kind of dimensions, and also like the fact that it's in the middle of nowhere, like, it's kind of insane. We'll get back to that. But this is located 320 kilometers southwest of Pine Gap. So now you're really starting to get an idea of how Pine Gap might seem to us like it's in the middle of nowhere, but it's actually smack bang in the center of strangeness and unexplained anomalies. And by the way, Woomera Test Range that we looked at in the first video in this series extends all the way out of South Australia to like just below all of this. Like, those two pictures are stitched together, but it's pretty accurate. It's a pretty accurate representation of how far Woomera Range actually stretches out to. Now, if you haven't seen that video yet, Woomera is where the British and Australians tested nuclear weapons and rockets during the Cold War. Now, I'm going to be reading this straight from Grok because I don't really know enough about Aboriginal culture to be commenting on it definitively, and it is very complex. But I am in contact with someone who is pretty embedded within the culture, and I'm going to be sharing some of his personal experiences in this area later in the video. And I'm actually hoping to gain a deeper understanding from this person about the culture as well. So there might be more on that soon. So let's take a look at what Grok can tell us about Uluru and the surrounding area. For the Anangu, the traditional Aboriginal custodians of this area, Uluru's history stretches back tens of thousands of years, potentially 40,000 or more, based on archaeological evidence of human occupation in Central Australia. The Anangu part of the Western Desert Cultural Bloc consider Uluru a sacred site tied to the Dreamtime, their framework of law, spirituality, and creation stories. Specific features like caves, waterholes, and rock markings are linked to ancestral beings such as Kunya, the Python Woman, and Liru, the poisonous snake man. Okay, I got a note on my last video for saying the word, but I'm sure we're all thinking what I'm thinking here. We're talking about creation stories, ancient history, and there's yet another reference of snake man and python woman. And what are snakes? What kind of group of animal are snakes? It rhymes with nail file. Sorry, let's continue. So the Python Woman and the Poisonous Snake Man, who shaped the landscape during the creation time. These stories were passed down orally, and the Anangu maintained a semi-nomadic life around Uluru, using its resources sustainably and conducting ceremonies at its base. Like, the parallels here to the Lacerda files, which specifically mention rural Australia and being there before man, it is kind of crazy. Like, either all of these people have been like using each other as reference material throughout history to create these fantasy stories, or there's actually some kind of truth to it. Now, I asked Grok to explain what the Dreamtime actually is, because as a white Australian, it's something I've known about since a child. I'm sure a lot of other white Australians know what the Dreamtime is too. But I don't actually know what it actually is, because it's kind of confusing for me anyway, because I'm obviously ignorant to this stuff, but I'm interested in it. So I asked Grok to tell me what the Dreamtime is, and this is what it said. The Dreamtime is the foundational concept of Indigenous Australian spirituality, law, and worldview. It's not a dream in the sense of sleep fantasies, but a timeless, ongoing reality that describes the creation of the world, its laws, and the relationships between people, land, and ancestral beings. Think of it as both a cosmology and living philosophy, deeply tied to the physical landscape and passed down through oral stories, songs, dances, and art for at least 40,000 to 60,000 years, based on archaeological evidence of Aboriginal presence in Australia. In the Dreamtime, ancestral beings, often taking forms like animals, humans, or natural elements, example Kunia the python or Mala the hare wallaby, emerged from a formless earth during the creation time. They traveled across the land, shaping mountains, rivers, and rock formations like Uluru, while establishing moral codes, social structures, and rituals. These acts didn't just happen in a distant past. The Anangu and other Aboriginal groups see the Dreamtime as ever-present, coexisting with today. The land itself is a living record of these events. Uluru's caves or waterholes aren't just geological features, but markers of specific ancestral actions like battles or teachings. Like, it's so interesting to hear like tones of non-linear time there, and sort of like a connected consciousness between humans and spirits and the land. Like, to me, this is just exactly like another interpretation of the same belief systems held by Native American cultures like the Hopi that we've talked about a lot on this channel. They worship the land, the spirits that created it, and they obey their law, the law of the land, to this day. It's extremely interesting. Like why does the white man, by its nature, want to travel, rip people out of their homes, and conquer land? But indigenous cultures just kind of want to chill and just be grateful for the earth. Like, are we the bad aliens? Seriously, we must be so annoying to them. Just before we leave Uluru, I don't want to get too tinfoil hat here. I kind of do a little bit. I always do. But, you know, I just want a disclaimer that this is a wild theory that I don't actually believe, but it's worth considering. Where are we? I've lost it. What I want to talk about is, can we all agree that Uluru, look at the landscape around it. That looks so unnatural. There's not even a small hill in sight. It's literally flat to the horizon, nothing anywhere ever. And then there's just this enormous rock as wide as a city, taller than the Eiffel Tower, there. I feel like we don't talk about that enough. Like, I'm not saying this is fake or anything, but how did that get there? Why is there not even like a smaller, tiny, sort of similar version of it anywhere in sight? It's just flat, to the horizon, every direction, taller than the Eiffel Tower, big as a city. Like, sure, like, what is that? What is that? So just before I read some of your experiences that you guys have sent in, I want to quickly show these. And I have shown them on the channel before, but I feel like it's good to kind of mix them in when we're back here talking about the area. And that is the Wandjina rocks. Now, these are not necessarily near Pine Gap. They're about 1,200 kilometers away to the northwest. So they're on the northern coast of Western Australia. But these are said to be about 6,000 years old. And as we learned from Grok, the Aboriginal people would pass down the stories of their dreamtime, the creation, through their artwork. And there's no denying that this artwork depicts a very similar image to what the remote viewers described seeing inside of Mount Zeil, or at the very least, if we don't want to go by the remote viewers, at the very least, we can agree that it looks like the modern grey alien, the big black eyes, the large head that is depicted and described in every sort of encounter that sort of happens with these things, or with abductions or whatever. Now, whether they're real or not, or they're just programmed biologics, who knows? But whatever they are, could these paintings suggest that whatever they are have played a role in our creation, and still to this day perhaps play an ongoing role in our evolution and our future? And to go even further, perhaps Mount Zeil is one of many other bases in other mountains and under the ocean that is like a coordination, command center type facility for these operations to take place. I know, wild theory, tinfoil hats are required, but let me know what you guys think about that in the comments, because, you know, I think that's, as crazy as it sounds, I think it's worth considering. Okay, so now I want to get on to some of the interesting emails that I've received from you guys. I want to start out with this one specifically because it kind of frames the following encounter stories. This person wrote in response to the last video where we deep dived on Canberra. He says, "Hi Josh, sorry, no LiDAR scans here. Just info I've gleaned over the years. I've not heard any UFO stories, but nothing would surprise me at this point. Canberra houses the US military's top state-of-the-art war room. It is a massive multi-level underground complex beneath most of Canberra. Once inside the main room, monitors display live feeds from every current theatre of war. It has hidden entry points like defunct phone exchange buildings. Many top brass military men can be seen entering or leaving, and it has raised questions with nosy locals wondering how such small buildings can hold so many staff members." This is where it gets juicy. This complex connects Pine Gap via a lev train, so that's like a magnetic levitation train. Pine Gap houses a 1.5 kilometer long rail gun. Imagine a giant Nike swoop. A beam of light is shot down it, bounces off the ionosphere, and gives them a real-time view of all flight paths on the entire globe. Okay, so from that email, we've got more confirmation of there being just a whole other world underneath Canberra. Interestingly, talking about a magnetic levitation train that goes from a war room within Canberra directly to Pine Gap, which is wild. And obviously, I can't prove this, but I wouldn't be surprised at all because of, like, especially considering like the location of Pine Gap. It is so remote. It's so far to get there. A high-speed train that is direct would make sense if it needs to be accessed by companies that already have billions of dollars. They probably funded it with the billions that can't be accounted for by the Pentagon each year, to be honest. But the other big thing was Pine Gap houses a 1.5 kilometer long railgun that shoots a beam of light into the ionosphere. Now, this person's email came in like pretty chill, pretty casual, just like, "Hey, what's up?" Threw out some kind of crazy claims that I can't verify, but are very interesting. But the 1.5 kilometer railgun thing, I was kind of like, I don't know. Like, just trying to imagine what a 1.5 kilometer long gun looks like is just like hard to fathom. Like, it's just hard to even picture that. So I really didn't think too much more of that, right? But then I got this email from another person. And this person went into far greater detail, giving me some of their background credentials, before also sharing a long list of sightings and experiences that they had in this area. Now, that's what we're going to get into. Okay, so we're just going to focus on this one place called the Simpsons Gap in this video. And the Simpsons Gap is only about 15 kilometers north to northwest of Pine Gap. Like, this is far closer than anything we've talked about or looked at in this video so far. Now, first, I'll give you this guy's background that he shared with me. He says, I'll just kind of dot point this for you before we get into his experiences. Born in 1966, grew up in South Australia, frequently camping in the Flinders Ranges, which is a giant sort of rural remote range in South Australia. Family is mostly professional teachers and principals, engineers, and some former military. Personal qualifications include Aboriginal studies and conservation and environmental sciences. Years of bushwalking experiences in the Flinders Ranges and McDonnell Ranges in the Northern Territory. He was enlisted in the Australian Defence Force doing reserve reconnaissance across the Northern Territory, mostly with Indigenous troops. Lived more than 20 years in the Northern Territory, entirely embedded culturally, and married into a Central Australian Arunta, I think I'm saying that right, Arunta tribal family, and can speak the Arunta language. Primarily working and traveling with practicing shamanic family elders, and was later employed as the cultural officer with the Healing Center in Alice Springs. Now, this person shared a long list of things, And I won't read them all because who knows, maybe he will come on the show one day and we can talk about it more, get a bit more details and context. But for now, we're just going to focus on the surrounding area of Pine Gap. And you can see there, he sort of references Alice Springs quite a few times. So he says up the top there, these sightings happened from 1991 to 99, multiple sightings whilst living on the Arunta outstation, which is adjacent to the Simpsons Gap, about 17 kilometers west of Alice Springs, or 6 to 7 kilometers northeast of Pine Gap. Okay, so these sightings are generally taking place between where you can see Simpsons Gap and Alice Springs. And he's saying this is about 6 to 7 kilometers northeast of Pine Gap. So super, super close. Okay. In the early 90s, lying in a swag at night just southwest of Simpsons Gap, no moon but very clear starfield, 3 large black boomerang-like craft passed overhead, traveling west less than 10,000 feet up. No lights whatsoever, no sound whatsoever, undulating flight path, too slow for known aircraft as the speed was well below conventional wing stall velocity. And then he suggests possibly experimental B-2 Spirit bombers with Thomas Townsend Brown derived electrogravitics. So I guess he's saying this craft sort of looks similar to a B-2. Again, I would love to get this person on the show. I know they're going to watch this video, and I would love to sort of ask questions like, how big is large? How big are we talking here? Because a large black boomerang craft is exactly what was sighted in the same decade by thousands of people over Phoenix, Arizona. And this thing was allegedly the size of 3 football fields. So how big are we talking here? And the super slow, no sound part is interesting because they may have looked like B-2 bombers, but, planes make sounds. So the suggestion of Thomas Townsend Brown and the fact that they're using electrogravitics is interesting. So these are all from the same person. Next one. And this is the one that kind of made my eyes pop open a little bit. Late at night, sometime in the mid-late 90s, I was stargazing on the outstation just west of Simpsons Gap during a lightning storm. I was facing north when from a distant site over the mountains and northwest of Simpsons Gap, not Pine Gap, a lesser-known military site along the Tanami Highway, officially part of the Jindalee over-the-horizon radar, a massive beam of light/plasma fired into the night sky, angling to the east. That massive beam was also wrapped in a perfect double helix of light or plasma. The beam source was over 15 kilometers away from where I was standing. The width of the beam must have been over 500 meters at its base. Immensely powerful. So obviously after reading this, I remember the other guy talking about a 1.5 kilometer railgun at Pine Gap firing into the ionosphere. Now this apparently happened northwest of Pine Gap, so they are potentially not exactly the same thing, but there is a recurring theme here of giant beams being shot into space in this area. And when you picture this happening in the kind of remote landscape that we looked at just before surrounding Uluru, it's kind of a crazy thought. And especially like that, a beam with like a double helix surrounding it, like, man, that's like, we're talking proper sci-fi here. I'm not saying it's fake, but like, it's crazy. Next one. In recent years, I discovered YouTube footage from a space shuttle taken in the late 90s of a beam some sources say originated near Alice Springs. That same beam/direct energy weapon barely missed a craft that was filmed suddenly changing course above Earth's atmosphere. So I guess he's kind of potentially alluding to the idea that these beams are a direct energy weapon aimed at targeting craft, which is something that, Stephen Greer and Jake Barber and all that are saying happens regularly in the desert at the facilities owned by places like Lockheed Martin. Now, I don't know what a direct energy weapon looks like. I've always kind of assumed that it's like an invisible thing, like electromagnetic, like you can't see it. But maybe they do have beams. I don't know. If anyone knows, let me know. He also said late 90s, 5 to 7 kilometers west of Simpsons Gap, 3 lights forming a perfect equilateral triangle moving slowly from south to north, high up at dusk, multiple witnesses, and then he suggests the TR-3B. It's interesting. I'm assuming that this thing must have looked quite different to the first one where he said the giant boomerang, because they're both kind of triangular. but I guess this is more equilateral. Again, I would love to pick this person's brain a little more. I would love to see the footage that he mentioned there as well. Next one. This is the last one. July 2000 is a little bit different. July 2005, on the outstation west of Simpson Gap, I was attacked in my car at night through an open window from behind, knocked unconscious, dragged out of the vehicle, kicked many times in the head, as a witness later told me, then dumped unconscious in a nearby shed. The attacker, whom I'll not mention, had known me for years and always been docile. I'd spent over 14 years helping set up and develop that outstation, known as Buzzacot's Block, whilst also assisting set up the Arunta Council in Alice Springs. There'd often be days and weeks of palpable tension on that outstation. We'd often joke that the space base was zapping us, like Havana syndrome, because old man Kay Buzzacott was a prominent political activist protesting against the nuclear cover-ups and ongoing at Roxby, Emu Fields, and Maralinga. Sometime before the old bloke's son, so he's referring to Kay Buzzacott, which I believe is Kevin Buzzacott, who was an Aboriginal political activist. Sometime before his son and himself were visited in the Arunta Council workshop by two Americans wearing Boeing uniforms with distinctive military body language and asking about the workshop. And this was some months before he was bizarrely attacked out on the block, the outstation, just north of Pine Gap. So this person who was embedded in and contributed to helping build this Indigenous community for decades suddenly got attacked at night in his car a few months after some American guys in Boeing uniforms came asking questions. Now, I don't know if they're related. He said he knows the attacker but won't mention them. I don't know. I don't know any more on that, and I'm not going to speculate because there's a chance we might actually be able to find out some more. So what do you guys think about all of that? Would you like that person to come on the show and speak more about that, and kind of we can learn about how Indigenous cultures interpret the phenomenon? I can't guarantee that he will, but I can certainly ask if that's something that people want to see. I think I'm going to talk to him in my own time anyway, because I'm interested. I want to know how these people see these things. Now, one thing I can confidently say is that the CIA and other agencies use the media as a tool for disinformation by almost hiding bits of the truth in plain sight. And I think the most classic examples of this are the Men in Black, secret agent. So this is the plot of the movie, by the way. This isn't a theory. The Men in Black storyline is a secret agency that monitors and regulates extraterrestrial activity on Earth, ensuring the humanoid and insect-like aliens live covertly among humans. And they use neuralizers, a form of technology, to erase witnesses' memories so they can continue to maintain secrecy while protecting the planet. What a crazy made-up story, huh? That's crazy. Who could come up with such fiction? And then we've got Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where small, slender, grey-skinned aliens with large eyes initiate contact with Earth. And they start appearing, the UFOs and the aliens start appearing during these escalated UFO sightings, and the military begins decoding alien communication and prepares the world for an incoming mothership. What a crazy story. That would never sound exactly like where we are today in 2025. No way. That's crazy. So I think putting slices of truth in fiction is the perfect way to make anyone who is possibly uncovering or suggesting that it is the actual truth to be seen as a lunatic who just watches too many movies. Or, in the case of Pine Gap, they just made a show that was literally so bad that no one will talk about it. I've watched about 2 minutes of this and I just cringed and turned it off. Maybe because it's how Australians sound on film. That just irks me, especially when there is a direct comparison to Americans' accents in the scene. It just emphasizes how retarded we sound. But if anyone out there has actually watched this show, is it good? Let us know in the comments. Is there potentially like any truth or interesting parts of the show that are littered among the fiction? Let us know in the comments. We need to know, but I don't want to watch it. Man, What a ride this video has been. We've just about hit an hour. I've learned so much. I hope you guys have too. If you have enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share it around, educate your friends on just how wild the Australian outback really is. And you can also support me even further by becoming a Polarity channel member. You get access to members-only videos, the members section of our Discord. You get your name in every video, and you get your own Polarity badge next to your name that ranks up as you go. And that's definitely my favorite part. So that's only $5 a month. It goes a long way to helping me create more content like this for you guys. And, you know, I don't think there's many other creators out there that are using Harry Potter relationship dynamics to draw parallels with national security and spy agencies. You will only get that content on this channel. Now, the latest members video was actually one of a 4-part travel vlog series that's coming from my time in Japan. And guys, when this channel gets big enough, and it will, we're going to start actually going to these kind of places like Mount Zeil and sussing out what the fuck is actually going on there. Okay. I want to start taking you guys overseas and investigating these places. I've got big visions, but first we have to get there. So guys, to conclude this video, I think it's very clear that Pine Gap's location is not random. They didn't just throw a dart at Australia and go, yeah, that's where we'll build this base. This facility is at the heart of a multitude of strangeness, UFO sightings, remote viewing, and cultural landmarks that hold significance in the story of all of our creation. So let me know what you want to see next, guys. Until then, keep being good, be kind to each other, make sure you're staying tethered to reality. It's easy to get lost out here. Get outside, touch grass, and I'll see you next time.
Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on?
No matter how far you go into the dark, when you flip, you go exactly the same place to the light. In our galaxy, everything. Because everything is in balance. Everything is a polarity.
I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is.